It was March 2011 when the United Nations authorized military intervention in Libya. The goal, as stated by the United States President Barack Obama, was to protect the lives of pro-democracy demonstrators from what was expected to be a bloody confrontation with the Libyan government. 2 days after UN authorization, the United States and other NATO countries began bombing government forces. 7 months later, rebel troops with Western support took control of the country, killing longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi. In the years since, Libya has been described as a failed state, a country divided by rival governments and political factions, marred by economic chaos, civil war, and a growing threat from Islamic State. Later, we'll ask our panel about the prospects for peace and stability under the new unity government, but we begin in Tunis with CCTV's Youssef Gaigi. And Youssef, I mentioned this new United Nations-backed government. What can you tell us about it? Who's in charge and how's it being received in Libya?
Yes, indeed, under the UN supervision, the Libyan political agreement was signed in December 2015 in Morocco. And basically, this agreement puts in place 3 new bodies, which are the Presidential Council, which is supposed to play the function of the head of state, then the Government of National Accord, which is supposed to carry the function of the government, and then there is the State Council, which is an advisory body. The Libyan political agreement also keeps the House of Representatives, which is the Libyan elected parliament, in place and recognizes its existence. And now, actually, at this very moment, it is soliciting the approval and the vote of the House of Representatives to recognize the Libyan Government of National Accord. The Government of National Accord and the Presidential Council are both led by Fayez al-Sarraj, who moved to Tripoli last month with a few other people, and he's based there to conduct operations and lead the new Libyan government.
Now, of course, before we had the formation of this unity government, there were competing factions in Libya, factions fighting for power. Are they now ready to come together?
Indeed, this is the issue in Libya. It is the number of factions, the number of competing factions in the country. And it is not clear whether they are going to accept this new government backed by the UN or not. But we know that the House of Representatives, which is based in the east of the country, in Tobruk, is divided. And there are people who are for the Libyan political agreement and for this Government of National Accord, and others who are not. In any case, this House of Representatives, it's been now more than 2 months that the Libyan political agreement came to light, and yet they didn't vote yet. They didn't even meet, actually, to vote on this new government. On the other hand, we have the General National Congress, which is based in Tripoli. And this Congress is basically almost disappeared and dissolved and left room for the new government. However, these two bodies are also backed by several militias and factions who carry the weapons and who operate in different cities and control these different cities. And obviously, without the approval and the acceptance of these militias and factions, the government will have major security issues.
Okay, thanks, Youssef. That's CCTV's Youssef Gaigi reporting from Tunis. Joining us to talk about all of this is Professor Alan Kuperman. He teaches global policy studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Najla El-Mangoush is a Libyan activist and the program officer for peace building and traditional law at the Center for World Religions, Diplomacy and Conflict Resolution. She joins us here in Washington, D.C. And with us from London is political analyst and commentator Sukant Chandan. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Sukant, let me start with you. So we have a new unity government in Libya. It's a deal brokered by the United Nations. Is this a turning point for the country?
It's a continuation of the absolute horror story that the Libyan people have had to been subjected since the Arab Sting, the NATO and the Allied Death Squad project to destroy and ruin Libya in 2011. The reason why the Western countries have forced this so-called unity government on the Libyan people, who already have several juntas and administration in Libya already, is to justify a whole number of things well, an attempt to justify, I should say, a whole number of things in international law. One is to try and release the over $60 billion that are posited in the Libyan Investment Authority that they want to release and loot further from Libya. Secondly, to justify their military invasion. Again, well, there's military special forces have been there from the NATO forces throughout since February 2011 anyway. And thirdly, also, is to contain and manage and proliferate the death squads, including the so-called Islamic State or Daesh in Sirte and other places around Libya as well. It's nothing but more bad, tragic news for the Libyan people.
Nestor, what's your view on that? We know that this is a country that's been beset by divisions. There have been factions fighting for power, fighting for control. Is this government going to hold together, bring all these groups together?
Well, I think there's hope from the Libyan people to have unity government because, you know, have been struggling for more than 5 years now to, you know, try to go from transition from war to peace. However, the unit government have a lot of issues and fragmentation in terms of how to have legitimacy with the local people who on the ground, who have been affected by violence in the daily life, who are not actually part of the negotiation process. So I think there is concern about the legitimacy of this government and what kind of challenges that already exist in the ground in terms of different militia groups and, you know, the power of weapons around the region in different cities, include Benghazi and Sirte, and also now in Tripoli.
Alan, you've written before this agreement was announced, that Libya is riddled with militants and anti-American terrorists, and that the US-led attack, which was ostensibly to save civilians, has backfired. Do you still believe that to be the case, given this new scenario?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly been the case in the sense that prior to NATO's intervention in 2011, the war was basically ending. It would have been over in about a week. There would have been something on the order of 1,000 people who had died tragically. But as a result of the intervention, we've now had 5 years of instability, and the death toll is well over 10,000. And so we can attribute that to this intervention, which backfired. As for this current unity government, as your guests have spoken about it, it really does lack legitimacy. And I think what illustrates that perhaps most simply is the fact that this government couldn't even fly in to the capital of Libya, the city of Tripoli. Instead, and the reason they couldn't fly in is because local officials denied them entry to the airport. So instead, they had to come by sea. If you can't even fly into the airport in the capital, you really lack legitimacy.
Serkan, the attack on Libya, which was authorized by the United Nations, led to NATO, which is a Western defense organization created to protect the countries of Western Europe. It bombed the country. President Obama said it was to protect civilians, but was this about protecting civilians, or was this about regime change in Libya?
Well, similarly to Iraq, the NATO and Allied death squad invasion, bombing and destruction of Libya was based on a whole bunch of barefaced lies. Gaddafi did not bomb peaceful protesters from the air. There were no so-called African mercenaries. It was nothing but a white supremacist racist justification for the mass lynching and persecution of dark-skinned Libyan and non-Libyan dark-skinned African people, i.e. the town of Tawarga. 30,000 people lived in the town of Tawarga in Libya, neighboring Misrata. The only town in North Africa of black Africans. 30,000 is no longer there because NATO's beloved rebels and freedom fighters have ethnically cleansed that town completely. So it was an absolute classic imperialist regime change operation, but more so like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like Somalia, like they're attempting in Syria and other places. It's a divide and ruin project to totally destroy what was emerging and ascending in the global south, leading Africa, leading the global south, one of the biggest, best oil, producers of oil in Africa. This could not allow to continue in the minds of the imperialists and their sellout allies within Libya. So it had to be destroyed, and that's what's happened. But now there's movement pushing back against this whole project. General Haftar, I'm no big fan of, but General Haftar has liberated Benghazi from Daesh. He was expelled from Misrata, he was expelled from Sirte, and the Mizrati militia handed over Sirte to Daesh over there as well. And there's a whole bunch of disgusting things. Libya 2011 today is the greatest scandal of the 21st century, and it deserves justice.
Alan?
Well, I'm not sure that I would agree with all of the motivations that were identified by your preceding speaker, but I would agree with the outcome. There is a great deal of chaos. In addition to this unity government, there are two competing governments in the east and west. And beyond that, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of separate militias that control little fiefdoms in Libya. And there was a report in the BBC just in the last day or so, and it said the unity government had the alliance or the loyalty of something like 10 of those militias. And so that's a tiny fraction of the forces that are in Libya. And until those militias can be unified to support a true unity government, a true government of national accord, then instead what you're going to see is fighting between these militias, and then some of them are going opportunistically to ally themselves with ISIS. And that's one of the things that's helped ISIS get this foothold. And it's a fairly substantial foothold on the center of the northern coast in Libya. And it's going to take both political efforts and ultimately some military efforts to crush ISIS in Libya. And so, as folks in England say, this is an own goal by NATO, by Obama, by Cameron. This was not a failed state. This was not a haven for al-Qaeda or ISIS. And as a result of this really ill-conceived intervention, we've created a third trouble spot in the greater Middle East.
Now, so what do you make of that? Those are pretty serious indictments we're hearing about Libya there. The fact that this is not a unity government, just 10 factions of many, many factions have actually only unified, that the government lacks legitimacy, and the fact that they couldn't even arrive there by plane. They had to come by boat. How much control do they have?
If you allow me, please, I would love to just comment on their comments. The intervention for me as a Libyan, and I was there in Benghazi during the intervention, it was necessary and was really urgent need to save the civilians. There is many Libyan have the same opinion. But really, what's the problem with this intervention? There is no holistic strategies or vision from the foreign policy, from the international community to help Libya to go through this chaos to peace or sustainable peace. So I think that interventions was limited for short time, for specific need, and then the international community actually, back up from the Libya.
I'm going to stop you right there, because President Obama was recently asked what he considered to be his worst mistake as president. I want you to take a listen to what he said. Let's watch.
Probably failing to plan for the day after what I think was the right thing to do in intervening in Libya.
So they're the president there saying it. Failed to plan for the day after. So what is the lesson, from this intervention in Libya?
Well, the lesson, I think, when you think about, I think, first of all, I'm really, against the military intervention as a solution. It could be limited, it could be used in certain points, but there is actually, it should be structural and strategy that could support the locals from, the bottom up. What the intervention tried to do, they tried to work with specific people and elite during that time to save the Libyan people, and that really worked. The purpose worked. But the problem after that, there is many early indicators where exist during that time as dangerous signs that Libya will go to what we have today. There is weapons everywhere. There is people have been traumatized by this violence. They have civilians, they decide to fight Gaddafi where they have no experience. witnessing the blood and witnessing the violence. You have economic crisis. You have crisis with identity, and political and social issues and grievances have been not addressed during all this dictatorship. So you have the potential to have this chaos. And I think as a Libyan, I'm not finding here as excuse, but we don't have local expertise who can really read the situation well. And I think here, whereas the international community who have experience in Iraq and many different countries before, they should at least support or try to provide us with a plan that could lead the country, or strategy or techniques that could go with the locals to reach the peace. And I think there is a dilemma between, do we want political settlement or we want peace agreement? And there is a huge difference between the two. The negotiation process is not built in foundation that could support the peace. It's very shortcut solution. It was very limited, rushed. If you need to have real engagement, you need energy and time to invest in the locals and have the credibility that could support that peace mechanism.
Okay, we've got to take a break, but before we go to a break, Shrikant, I just want to get your comments on what Najla's been saying here.
Well, God help any people who are inviting the quote-unquote experience from Afghanistan and Iraq to their own country. It's crazy. I mean, Afghanistan and Iraq should tell you what's in store for your country if you invite the former colonialists of your country to come and try and quote-unquote free you. They're not going to free you. It was always intended that they were going to do to Libya what they've done. And if you are wondering what they're going to do, well, look at Iraq and Afghanistan, and now we can see Syria and Yemen and other places. What's actually going on in Libya on the ground? I mean, by the way, Obama's comments are very stingy and measly and deceitful comments indeed. The only reason Obama made those comments is to snipe at the British and French. Remember back in 2011, the British, French and the USA military top brass and political class were openly bickering with each other over Libya. United States was annoyed that Britain and France was dragging its military muscle to do Britain and France work in Libya. Why is that the case in 2011, and why is it the case today that Obama has made this comment about his greatest mistake, about not destroying Libya in 2011, but not actually developing monopoly of control for the United States post the NATO intervention? The reason is that Gaddafi, when he nationalized the oil from the British and US oil companies in the 1970s, he handed over the oil contracts and deals particularly to the Italians and the French and other Europeans. And now this is the inter-imperialist rivalry and by proxy conflict that is going on in Libya between the British and the Americans on the one hand, or the US on the one hand, and the French and the Italians and others. The British and the UK, all the European and the North American powers are bickering amongst each other who's going to monopolize Libya, and the Libyan people are the victims of that.
Welcome back. We're talking about the political challenges facing Libya. Reports have emerged that the Islamic State may have doubled its size in the country. Analysts in neighboring Egypt say the new Libyan government needs to move quickly to prevent the jihadist group from gaining more of a foothold. We get more now from CCTV's Adel El Makrouki.
It's been clear for months to regional powers such as Egypt that ISIL would build on its bridgehead in Libya. The group has lost more and more ground to coalition airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, but the ongoing chaos in much of Libya has made it easy for ISIL to flourish there and recruit. It's now thought to number at least 6,000 fighters. For Egypt, the key is restoring strong government in Tripoli and giving that government the weapons to fight back.
ISIL is benefiting from the political gap, the absence of a strong government in its territories. Egypt is in the lead of the concerned countries who realized that and is working very hard to lift the arms embargo over the Libyan government.
During his visit to Tripoli, Italy's Foreign Minister Paolo Gentiloni said the arms embargo could soon be lifted. But that depends on Libyans backing the new unity government led by Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj. Al-Sarraj currently needs to win over a rival parliament in Tobruk.
If the unity government gains local support, besides international recognition, and it starts operations, ISIL's expansion will freeze. Libya's neighbors, Egypt, Tunisia and Algeria, are trying to support Fayez al-Sarraj's government. This will prevent ISIL extending its influence.
It has come down to a race in Libya between the two rivaling parliaments and ISIL. Analysts say the clock is ticking, and the longer Libyans take to support the unity government, the stronger ISIL will become. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Well, let's continue our conversation now with our panel. Alan, let's pick up on that last point there made in that report. Analysts saying that the longer Libyans take to support this unity government, the stronger Islamic State will become. It's a point that you made just a moment ago, that Islamic State already has a significant foothold in the country. But the longer Libyans take to support this government, will it entrench Islamic State even further?
Well, I think that the existence of the Islamic State in Libya is actually one of the things that is driving Libyans to consider a unity government. Prior to the existence of ISIS, the Libyan factions were sort of happily fighting with each other for turf. But as ISIS started to take more and more of that turf, some of the competing Libyan factions realized that unless there were going to be some unification of the Libyan factions into a Libyan government, then ISIS would take more and more and more of the territory. So the existence of ISIS is actually providing some hope, but still it's a long road ahead for forming a unity government. Your correspondent talked about a competing government in the east, in Tobruk, but that's only one of the competing governments. In fact, the capital is controlled by another competing government that has never been recognized by the international community. I'd also like to say just one other thing about President Obama and his comment that his greatest mistake was to fail to do nation building in Libya after overthrowing the government and destroying the country. And it's interesting, President Obama, when he looked at his predecessor, George W. Bush, he didn't say that George W. Bush's greatest mistake was to fail to do nation building in Iraq after overthrowing the government in Iraq and destroying Iraq. He said the failure, the great mistake, was intervening in Iraq in the first place and overthrowing the government. So I think either President Obama is being disingenuous to try to preserve his legacy in defending this intervention, or he has a cognitive blind spot. He can't realize that he did in Libya almost the identical thing that George W. Bush did in Iraq. That is, on the basis of phony information, he went in, overthrew a government, destroyed a country, and took a country that was actually an ally in the war on terror and turned it into a safe haven for terrorists.
Shrikant?
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. Well said, the former colleague who just spoke. You know, when it comes to Daesh, let's remember that the leading NATO powers teamed up with Daesh forces and many others in destroying what was the best country in perhaps the entire global south in terms of the living standards, etc., healthcare, education, housing, that was Libya. Now, you've got Daesh in Sirte. Before you had Ansar Sharia, which is another supremacist death squad. Daesh took over, as I said, thanks to the Mizrati death squads there as well. But also you've got Daesh in ties and suits in Tripoli as well. None other than the leading Daesh death squad leader of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, Mr. Belhaj, was a primary and senior ally, albeit junior in the grand scheme of things, of NATO in destroying Tripoli and Libya in the first place in 2011. It's Mr. Belhaj and these death squads in Tripoli who are using Sabrata as a training ground for the recruitment of death squads from Tunisia and other places, training them, financing them, and then flying them into Turkey to enter Syria. Libya is performing a similar role that Afghanistan did in the 1980s as a place where the neo-colonialists and imperialists can recruit these death squads and terrorists, train them and arm them, etc., and then proliferate them according to their strategic interests, particularly in Syria, in Iraq. So really we have to be honest and see what the true nature of the alliances were in 2011 and how they continue today and how they're being manipulated.
Najla, what's your view on this? Has Libya become a haven for groups like Islamic State?
Yes, I just have comment to Mr. Shrikant about we didn't actually invite the international community to come to our and you know target Gaddafi, and also there's other facts about the early days in the revolution when people decided to protest in peaceful way against the regime. they were actually, African Missourians tried to kill the people, and I was seeing them,
Disgusting lie. This is a disgusting lie.
It's not lie, because I was witness that. With all my respect, I was witnessing that with my colleagues in the court.
No. The rebels in Benghazi, their first act was to string up black people and to chop them up. You can see that on YouTube. It was based on a blatant lie. Let's not whitewash this.
Well, I was witnessing that, and you have the choice to believe or no. Yes, we have a lot of outcomes that we can share with Iraq experience and Afghanistan, and there is a lot of failure, but also there is uniqueness, and there is a legacy of dictatorship for more than 42 years. There is discrimination, there is violence, have been, structurally and organized against the people. I witnessed all this dictatorship. I grew up in Libya. I just left, Libya from 3 years ago. So I really know everything.
Has Libya become a haven for Islamic State?
Yes. Become haven for all the different militia groups who have different ideologies and agenda.
Okay, Shakant, I want to get a quick response from you, and then I want to go to Alan, but go ahead first.
Yeah, I mean, the sister has said she lived in Libya until the last 3 years, so it was good enough for her to live until the last 3 years. And now she's admitting herself it's a safe haven for death squads and terrorists, and she had to escape and flee the country in the last 3 years. So enjoy your freedom and liberation that you invited NATO to deliver. Actually, what's happening in Libya, there's movements of the tribes, the social tribes, all across Libya who are patriotic, who are anti-colonial, who are developing a mass-based patriotic movement towards justice, which is being ignored and being countered by NATO. And also there's Haftar's forces, which has a military blockade by the NATO powers, because they also are teaming up with justice-oriented, unity-oriented Libyans in cleaning up the country from the death squads. This process is continuing. More and more Libyans will come back, and they will soon start on the path to returning Libya to the leadership of the African world, to the leadership of the Arab world and the global south that once it had from 1969 to 2011.
Okay, Alan, final question to you. Will this new unity government survive?
Well, I would point to something that Najla said early in the show today, and that is that the only way to really form a unity government in Libya would be through true negotiations of the Libyan parties themselves. And that is a long process that requires patience, and the international community did not have patience. And the reason is that the international community wanted to do something about ISIS. And so what they did is they tried to short-circuit the process and said, okay, well, you folks can't agree, so we'll impose on you a unity government. And that unity government was then rejected by the two existing governments. That's not going to work. What you need to do is go back to the table and try and get all the Libyan interests around the table and have them negotiate and make compromises until they come to an agreement for a true unity government. At that point, you have at least a chance. If once you have a unity government, then you have to get all the militias to support it. And if that could happen, then you have a chance of having a unity government, a united army. And if you have that, then you could probably make fairly quick work of ISIS.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.